Okay, so welcome everybody. This is we're going to look at Pathwork Guide Lecture number 124. This was originally channeled May 1st, 1964, and it's titled "The Language of the Unconscious." And I found in my own journey, I've been. Let's see, somebody's coming in, but I'm not sure where oh, there it is. Admit. Okay, here comes Crystal. Um, I'll give it a minute and let Crystal come in before. You there?
I'm here. Let me make sure I put it on mute because my baby now wants to have like a trance rave every night. So I'm on a baby watch. So let me just put this on mute and I'll unmute when I
Okay.
can. Okay. Hi.
All right. Very good. Welcome. So I was just introducing the lecture, and it's called The Language of the Unconscious. And I find, in my own journey lately, there is this deep understanding and need to, connect to this, deeper reservoir of our being and sort of the shadow work, which can also be, the higher self, because it's kind of also in the unconscious to some degree. But the guide here is talking about a very specific aspect of the unconscious, which is, like our inner no current. And so I find that it's also really useful to, be aware of the, kind of this process of, where we're aligned and where we're saying yes and, where there might be a no. I think there's like even a way and kind of your internal exploration to kind of go around the medicine wheel, and have sharing from all of the different parts of you that might have feelings about some decision or some, aspect of something going on in your life. And so it's kind of a fun way, right, to like invite everybody to speak. And especially let's remember to hear from the any objections, any resistances, any no currents. So let's hear from the guide on this. It says, "Greetings, my dearest friends, blessings for every one of you. Blessed be this hour, and may this lecture help you again discover more of yourself, to widen and raise your consciousness, to strengthen your grasp on reality." And I want to, certainly invite anybody to, interrupt me at any point if something comes up, or I'll try to pause and check in so that we have a conversation and a discussion as we're going. So, it says the most powerful aspect in your life is the unconscious. Everything favorable, pleasurable, advantageous, as well as your hardships, suffering, disappointments, unfulfillments, so-called bad luck, the repetition of unfavorable patterns, are all determined by your unconscious thinking and feeling. I think most of us sort of can recognize sometimes the repetition of unfavorable patterns as a clue, that we're, dealing with some kind of element of the unconscious that's sort of locked in. And these all are determined by our unconscious thinking and feeling. And this comprises a great deal more than is commonly understood. When you speak of your fate, of what happens or does not happen to you, as if by fate, the truth is that these events are caused by nothing else but the governing forces of unconscious factors. The unconscious is much stronger than the conscious mind because the absurdity of conscious misconceptions and unrealistic outlooks is more easily detectable and therefore can be corrected. What is hidden from awareness continues to govern you without your being able, through your reason, to change it. Hence, it is of utmost importance to detect such hidden erroneous outlooks. And, sometimes this is not easy, right, to really penetrate into these unconscious layers of ourselves. And that's where I found, one way is to really just sit in the energies and work with it in our bodies in various ways. So maybe we can explore and say more about that as we go. But, he's saying that there's this aspect of, inner repressed, feelings and beliefs that we've grown up around, and kind of they've fallen into the unconscious in various ways. Sometimes we're holding them there, suppressing them. Sometimes, we've just kind of grown up around them and don't even realize that they're still, inside of us. And so it's like by looking at our outside life and where things are, maybe disharmonious in some way, where there's a negative pattern or something, that we can kind of construct what's going on behind the scenes. And when we're finding ourselves in those expressions of ourselves, sometimes scratching our heads, right? Wondering what's coming up in us, even that's the time where we can do this inner exploration and really welcome, all of these aspects, however they're presenting themselves. So if it's, some kind of inner reaction to a circumstance in the world, that can, be explored, felt as a feeling, seen as the belief behind the feeling, and the conclusion that is drawn, the suffering that is there, and then we can begin to see that what's buried in the unconscious may not necessarily be the truth right now. It may have been a truth in our childhood. It may have been a truth in a past life. Who knows? But it's often just something that if it's present in this moment, it's because at some level we're unconsciously recreating it. So any questions, comments? So it's often forgotten that the unconscious not only harbors petrified wrong conclusions, destructive behavior patterns resulting from images and negative emotions due to unresolved problems, but also utter wisdom, divine truth, and the most constructive elements in the universe. So constantly building them with unending creativity and love. So there's this well of positive energy as well that's always within. And these wells of positive energy can be tapped to the degree that the obstructions are let out of their hiding place, the unconscious. Then and only will all the productive elements which are still hidden rise to the surface. Only when you are in a dynamic process of growth and development do these words become real. Until then, they represent a theory, no more. Little by little, as you begin to discover the strange, exciting, at times even slightly frightening, and yet exhilarating reality of your unconscious, you will begin to have an inkling of the powerful elements that are buried in it. So we must strive on this path to detect as much as possible, not only what is erroneous, but also the productive elements behind the errors. They all lie deep within yourself. To the degree that you liberate yourself from the rubbish of useless fears and misconceptions that divide you, the constructive, creative, and productive elements you never knew existed will be freed. So I think, here it's like kind of important to think about it in this way. Like we're not trying to fix ourselves or add anything to us. Like already inside of us is the positive, constructive, elements and the divine, what I kind of call the divinity. And then, it's like mostly the job is removing the obstructions from it, and removing the confusions and the uh, images that, are not in alignment with divine reality. So we're just really clearing out, stuff that's, mixed up and lost and confused. And we can do that in a very understanding, compassionate way because it's, elements of consciousness that may in fact have some negativity, but, we can see that, the origin of it, the need is there. There's, a way that we can meet it with love, compassion, understanding, right? And the more we can get to know all of these inner parts of ourselves, and the more that we're, there as a constructive force, I think, most of the time it helps a lot with this uncovering. The unconscious is sort of wary and afraid of being moralized with. Like sometimes we look under the covers and we see something there that we think, oh my God, I shouldn't be that way, or that's a bad thing, or whatever, and then we kind of pull the covers back up and push it down. And so these kinds of things help keep everything, like our fears of what's in there, come largely from our own self judgments. And then when we're having a lot of that, it's hard for these parts to reveal themselves, right? They're going to be hiding from us. And oftentimes, I think a lot of anxiety and difficulty that we have is because of our relationship to ourselves that is felt and experienced by the unconscious as sort of a hostile relationship, as a controlling relationship, as a judging relationship. So we're just opening to just be aware of everything that's in the unconscious, and the more self-knowledge we have, right, the more powerful our work can be. And so this is a path that's kind of built on self-knowledge, self-responsibility, but you can't really have those unless you have self-acceptance. So, the place where we don't accept ourselves is kind of like one of those barriers to, opening into the unconscious and working there. And so in some senses that's like a step, and then we can go and discover and embrace what is within us. So before we come to more practical hints in this respect, let me discuss the following. Your personality is a repetition in smaller form of the whole universe. Both the individual and the universe exist because of a certain distribution of various cosmic energies. The way these energies interact and are arranged determines the harmonious or disharmonious existence of the created being, human, universe, plant, or leaf. In their ideal creation and state, these energies and forces work together, perfectly complementing one another rather than hindering one another. Hence, the created being emanates one unified cosmic current. Again, this applies to a stellar system, an individual planet, as well as every entity inhabiting the individual planets, from mineral to the highest spiritual creatures. The regulating universal forces must be the same for all. When a stellar system disintegrates, it is because contrary forces are at work. The opposite of truthfulness, realism, awareness, and consciousness. The two opposing forces create such tension through pressure of two opposing energy currents that finally an explosion occurs and the entity annihilates itself. This is again applicable to a stellar system, a planet, or the decay of a leaf on a tree. To put it simply, the universe up to a certain degree of development or awareness consists of two primary currents, a yes current and a no current. The yes current includes every constructive energy because it accords with truthful insight, which cannot help but breed love and unity. The no current is destructive because it inadvertently deviates from truthfulness, thereby breeding hate and disunity. This general explanation applies to your individual daily life as well as to great concepts in the history of creation. So, this is interesting here because, it's like it's clearly sort of, the yes is the good current and the no current somehow is, destructive and breeds hate and disunity. And yet, I think in another lecture, the guide talks about how critical to the whole plan of salvation that the fact of our free will, right? And so, like, here's where, without the no current, we would have to say yes in some way, right? Everything, all our yeses would, potentially be coerced, right? There wouldn't be choice, there wouldn't be free will. And so within us, when we have conflicting currents and oftentimes we can experience this. One part says, oh, yes, I want to, or even, or maybe it's I should, but another part legs back or doesn't agree, has reservations in some way. And
Darwin, I also say that this also forces us to learn about unity because otherwise everything would be united.
exactly.
And I also I just would share just quickly. I had a dream 2 nights ago that the yin yang symbol
Uh-huh.
was what's the word, censored. So it became illegal to have the yin yang symbol,
Uh-huh.
and I was a part of a group that was trying to get it reinstated, and we were trying to make the argument that it was just two colors. It didn't have any of the new what do we say, like subversive elements of meaning that everything is of the same substance, and then that all is united. And that was like I was trying to just say that, but in the dream it was because there had gotten to a point where whoever was in power or whatever was so intimidated by the yin yang symbol because it it promoted unity and it promoted a state of existence that was above fear, and without fear they didn't have control, and that's why it was outlawed in this like dream world I was in. So anyways, it's
Uh-huh.
just interesting, reminded me of this.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And I think also, there is this kind of sense again that there has been suppression of these understandings, in our culture, right, and in certain ways as well. And that symbol, of course, came from, I guess, the Eastern, but it's like these larger worlds, this connected, interconnected world, and stuff like that. We've in Western civilization sort of wanted to not know that and forget that. And
Well,
I think,
just kind of like our word for death is like id, whereas I think it's like Sufi, the in like the Sufi tradition, that I think the word for death translates to westing, like you go to the west.
uh-huh,
So it's
uh-huh,
like secular, and that's just kind of like their cultural understanding of death, whereas ours means end. So it's just
exactly.
interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. So, and here the guide is, really saying like inside of us, there's also, so I don't know, like maybe think of some aspect of your life, where, the maybe most of you is, aligned or, longing, but somehow it's not manifesting. Right? The guide says, like where we have a yes current and we have a longing to, create or manifest something in the positive, but for some reason, it doesn't come forth. That we have to explore and see if there might be a no current inside of us that we're unconscious of. So, see if you can just apply this for a second in your own life space to something that you're aware of that you've been wanting or, working towards, and it somehow is elusive. And just see, if there might be some part of you that, even though maybe 99% of you is saying, yes, let's go for it, like some part of you, but what about, or me, or that seems scary, or that, I feel like I'm not quite ready, or whatever, there's all kinds of different aspects of ourselves that, have different understandings of what, it requires and what, it would mean, to say yes, right? And so in a way to be in free will, we can't coerce ourselves. So we have to sort of also unify all of the different parts of ourselves, right? And hear all of their voices and then, kind of negotiate or, bring truth, and try to find a way that things can be aligned and unified and everybody, can assent to sort of a go forth or a yes movement, right?
I was actually going to say something like that, that there could be certain parts of your personality that are in the yes and certain parts of your personality that are in the no. For instance, your adult, mature um, self, your real self could be in the yes, and your wounded child could be totally in the no
Right.
about something that's going on, you
Right.
know?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so in some ways, we have to honor the no. We can't just coerce the yes, or we can't shame ourselves out of the no, or blame ourselves, or, be frustrated with ourselves and try to make ourselves, change from that resistance to, that, yes. But it's amazing, I think, how much we do that, right? Maybe in subtle ways, like, there's this outer will that most of us have, and then we live our lives, with our list of to-dos that we know we should get done, or we not want to or need to, and so then, we're pretty much ignoring, like, some, maybe the inner child wants to go play instead, and so we're saying, okay, I hear an inner no, but I need to just keep going and get this done, right? And it's a valuable capacity that we can, sort of override our no's in instances where, we uh feel sort of aligned that the best for everything to just, keep going or whatever. But it's like too much of that, and, too much just sort of controlling will cause a kind of general shutdown of the inner life force that doesn't have spontaneity and doesn't have an option to say yes. It just has the option to keep saying yes to doing what, we're expecting it to do. And so it's really beautiful, like when we start feeling depressed or negative and about a situation, or we wake up and there's no zest for life. I mean, sometimes we're just stuck in negative things, and we need to remember the whole picture, gratitude and understanding of the larger journey. But oftentimes there's a way that we've been sort of dragging ourselves through life in a way that's not um, making our inner child feel, connected with. And in some ways, that was the inner child's wound in the first place, was, she couldn't feel like people saw her well or understood, or, could meet her needs and his needs, in the way that really longed for. So, there's this sort of basic expectation, that we just unite under the control of the outer executive will that says, yes, look, we need to do this and we should do that. And this is what, and there's some truth to that, right? It's like the guide is saying, it's never what we do, but the way in which we do it makes the difference. And so, if we can have our internal yes sort of, aligned, and we can, help ourselves find that yes all the way through, then we can, do whatever we're doing in a spirit of play, expansion, love, enjoyment. Even if it's chop wood, carry water, it can be very rich, and we can be very present. And if we're, doing it from sort of this outer will place that's kind of just trying to get through its to-do list and check off, and it's kind of like, I think that part of us feels like, oh, if I'm going to ever have any time to do the things I want to do, I have to get all of this, mountain of what I have to do done, right? And so this is, I think, some of the reality principle is there, and it's true, we have to, but maybe we can find ways of helping our child come to a inner yes. Like if we can engage our child even in those tasks that, are sort of what we have to do in some kind of positive way, it'll make the tasks easier, right? So maybe there's, some way that you can lighten up about it, just in the intensity of the feeling, or you can, play with it in some way. It's like air and lightness and uplift, and those kinds of things need to come into our lives. Um, And that helps with, the feeling of the yes current. So back to the lecture. She says it's easy and absolutely feasible to detect the yes and no currents within yourself in your daily lives if you learn to understand and to interpret the language of your personal unconscious. To do so requires a certain technique, the same as learning any new language. It means practice, perseverance, and patience in order to learn the new symbols. Language in any shape or form is a conglomeration of symbols. What else is language? When you say the word table, it is a symbol for the object you use and know. The same applies to the language of your personal unconscious mind, and it is just as possible to learn its language as to learn any other language. The work of this path is manifold. We have described it in various analogies and defined it several ways. Among many other things, this path is also the learning of the language of the unconscious. And when you do so, you are bound to detect the yes and the no currents. So the yes current is often, but not always, the more noticeable of the two, because it is mostly conscious. Whenever you find yourself disturbed because of persistent unfulfillment, you can be sure that both currents must be strongly at work. Like if we were all the way aligned in no, we would be okay, right? If we were all the way aligned in yes, we would be going forward. It's when we're split between the two that we have difficulty. And so consciously, if the yes current is stronger and blocks out the unconscious no current, and the more the latter is squelched in the erroneous idea that this eliminates it, the more it is driven underground, where it continues to do its work. And the more this happens, the more urgent and frantic the yes current becomes. So if you find a place where you kind of want to force yourself, or you're feeling sort of frustrated with some part of yourself and you can't make yourself be the way that you think you should be, and it's getting sort of this more urgent thing, it really does mean that you have to go in and find this counter current. The two currents pull the personality in two opposite directions, creating stronger and stronger tension and pressure. The way to eliminate the short circuit is to uncover the no current, understand its faulty premise, and thereby gradually shed the belief in the necessity for its existence. So, does that mean that there's never an appropriate point to say no? I mean, I think boundaries, I think discernment, like all of that is good, and it's not exactly the same thing as a no current. Usually when we feel the no current, the thing is to really understand its premise, period, and determine, is this a faulty premise or is this actually a good premise, right? And sometimes I think there's divinity in the premise and maybe distortion. So sometimes we even have to get, more refined and kind of see where where again, there's some truth, but there's also some, way that we're going about it, and some, forcing current or energetic negativity that also then makes it false and not the life-giving aspect of the yes current. In those areas of your life where things go easily, where you appear to be lucky, where most of the time you are fulfilled without any problematic and confusing crisis, you can be sure that there is very little no current, and the yes current predominates without a contradictory hidden undercurrent. To put it differently, not only is the surface attitude, but the attitude of your entire being undivided and in accord with reality. You are not split in motivation and in desire. But in areas where you are repeatedly unlucky, the no current must be at work in one form or another. Of course, the reasons may vary with each individual, but the underlying causes have to be clearly defined in order to inactivate them. So this is a part of also the sort of this inner excavation work, right? Is we need to listen to that no current and understand, what its, piece of truth might be, if there is one, and then help it see where it's, maybe not in truth. So,
Wait, I have a question though.
uh-huh.
So if there's an area of your life that you're really lucky, such as career, for example, like if you've been very lucky and it's been very easy for you to have what happens to a lot of people, a traditional career, and like for myself in law, if you're all that stuff that just came so naturally, that it was just success exponentially, and everybody else is astounded, and you think, wow, I should probably be astounded too. But then there's this current that says this isn't what you need to be doing.
Okay, interesting. So like it seems like this must be pretty much of a yes current, because there's easy success and that's working out really well, but some part of you has a no current there. It's maybe a little conscious, or it's like it's maybe coming up more recently or something. But yeah, I would definitely explore why what it's saying, and there may be a truth to it, right? And there may be something more, or there's time. It's the time now to use
Yeah, I
those.
think maybe it's just like a soul blueprint that you choose. Like it's something where it's like you wanted something to come really easy just so you would have the space to crystallize, oh, okay, that's not the point. The point is something that maybe that's deeper, like spiritual path or more creative work or whatever, right? So maybe that's just a different topic than the no current, yes current, so.
Yeah, I think it can be. I mean, certainly think that there is, like, like we came in to work on certain things, and not everything, thank goodness.
Right.
And so there are certain things that maybe come naturally more easily to us. We feel more supported in our lives, and that does
I
give
mean,
us
like what about the Buddha, right? Like the Buddha was like born into
right.
riches and position and power and beauty and family life, and then walked away from it all for spirituality. So I mean, there's those stories that we hear quite frequently, and I think that might just be a different blueprint, not so much kind of following the unconscious. It's there's probably some way to square the two.
Yeah, and his, apparently that, part of his destiny, was, to contrast and to help him wake up, and then his choice, was, to let that go, and find that there's a deeper, source of pleasure or goodness, or, detachment, really, to be outside of the suffering that life brings. His mission was really to explore sort of this way that our attachment is what creates suffering, right? And so, like whatever his status and his, wealth was in the earthly plane, right? He was a demonstration of sort of non-attachment in that way. Um, but yeah, all of these things, I mean, there's, various different reasons why, different things are happening, but it's always useful to kind of explore this no current. And most of the time, it's where you have a longing for something else, for some time, and you keep hoping that it's going to come, and you keep working to get it, and you keep struggling for it, but then somehow it just keeps eluding you, or never quite gets a foothold, and there I think is where you can explore and see the no current more clearly. So any goal you consciously desire and nevertheless do not attain is proof that an undetected no current is at work. It is not sufficient to gain or have gained understanding of your images and misconceptions, nor how and why they came into existence in the particular circumstances of your childhood. So we got to go deeper than that. Important as that work is, it's only one step. And in this respect, most of us have made considerable progress. We can maybe see our, negative beliefs or our overgeneralizations, about the world and how we're kind of recreating them, our assumptions, our negative expectations. And he says, but that's not sufficient, for we're all mistaken when we believe that having found the misconceptions, the erroneous conclusions will automatically change your innermost subtle emotional reactions. So, we have to see, what those conclusions are, but there's a deeper change of the inner subtle emotional reactions. It does not work that way because the assumption only leads to the illusion that your finding and your momentary relief has already liberated. So I don't know if this makes sense, but a lot of times people come into this work, right, and we maybe do a deep piece of process, and then we have kind of an inspiration or a realization, right, or we see in the connection between the present day circumstances and our suffering and, maybe our childhood experience or something like that. And so, we have this recognition, and even this recognition of the underlying belief that, is about ourselves or the way life is or the way things are, that kind of hold it in place. But, we have to not only have that realization and that recognition, but we're going to continue to react in this old way. So we have to work with, like coming into the feeling level of it. So he's saying, let me go back and read this again. It does not work that way because this assumption only leads to the illusion that your finding and your momentary relief has already liberated you, while you continue to react in the old way without being aware of it. Sooner or later, this is bound again to produce negative results, which then come as double disappointment and discouragement. So many people, I remember back in the old days, we used to do a lot of work and a lot of kind of finding like this, but it seemed like even though we did that and it did seem to help, that there was still kind of this constant recycling, of the feeling level of it. And it didn't, quite somehow shift in the way that we were expecting and hoping. And I think there is a kind of deeper dive that has to be done in that, again, a step along the way, the recognition, and then still some work remaining. So the only way change can come about is through detection of how the no current continues to work, even prohibiting the very change so ardently striven for by the yes current. For that purpose, you really have to master the language of the unconscious. Let us assume you wish for a certain fulfillment in your life you have lacked until now. You may have been aware of a strong desire for this fulfillment, and in your pathwork you have discovered unconscious misconceptions, false guilts, and destructive attitudes that prohibit it. You may even have discovered a fear of the very fulfillment you wish. And I don't know if other people have seen this, but it's always good to see, oh yeah, like I really want that, but there's a part of me that's really afraid. It might be too big, or it might be too, I don't know if so where we have these kind of more conservative parts of us that, are not quite ready to just take on everything in the world. And so, where we discover this fear of the very fulfillment that we wish, and consequently a subtle attitude of rejecting it. The fear may be based on an entirely illusory premise and therefore be unnecessary. It may be due to the childish desire of not wanting to pay the necessary price connected with the fulfillment. It may be a feeling of not deserving this happiness. It may be any number of further reasons or combinations of all of them. Whatever they are, you have in essence discovered what stands in your way. You may experience the discovery as a one-time nucleus, as it were, like a package of disturbance. But it rarely occurs to my friends that this package continues to send forth its expressions in spite of having been detected. And this is the important part of the work, without which real liberation cannot be achieved. So you may take a minute, like I think, and see if you can find in your experience, one of these desires that have been unfulfilled in your life, and see if you can just tune in. It's good to bring a real life example, to these conceptual concepts. So see if inside of you there might be some kind of in the longing for it, also some kind of guilt about receiving it, or some fear of that fulfillment that, you are afraid to take on, or some cost that you may have to be prepared to pay for it that you don't want to pay. It might be, yeah, again, this sense of not deserving this happiness. So see if they can find anything like that inside of you. So in view of all this, it's necessary to renew your efforts in daily detection of the no current at work. Its manifestations may be ever so subtle, diffuse, and almost too elusive to catch. But if you set out to do so, what was once so hazy as to be almost impossible to formulate will become obvious. It will stand out in clear contour. You will discover how you slightly cringe at the thought of the fulfillment whenever it approaches. When it is playful fantasy, all may be well. You may detect a vague feeling of familiar uneasiness, which you used to push aside when you thought about the fulfillment. Is it a feeling of fear or false guilt that you do not deserve it? Whatever it is, try to take these vague, hazy emotional impressions and question them in the daylight of consciousness. Examine the faraway fantasy when apparently only the yes current is at work. But in this fantasy, do you wish for the impossible, in that you do not take into consideration the human imperfections in all concerned? Do you fantasize in the spirit of having it all your way, which may not be bad or wrong, but upon closer examination is rigid, one-sided, or unrealistic? In this fantasy, do you expect being favored at the expense of flexibly adjusting to your new circumstances? In these circumstances, you could give of yourself as you compromise and renounce your expectations. Or do you suddenly feel that life should furnish you with the ideal fulfillment without necessitating change, adjustment, or relinquishing on your part? This prevalent attitude may be extremely subtle and require all your discernment to discover it. When you do, you will have found a reason for the existence of the no current, which functions exclusively when it comes to reality, but not in your one-sided image, fantasy, desire, dream for it. In such one-sided fantasy, you may even be willing to give of yourself, but only because in the fantasy you direct the play and thus determine how, when, and in what way you are giving. In reality, you cannot determine all that. Reality requires you to be ready with your flexibility when necessary, because you unconsciously know all that. You block the fulfillment, because like we know, like, okay, it's, we say yes to this, but it's not going to really turn out exactly how we want it, right? And so then we, hold back, somehow waiting for the impossible. When you will understand why your life has not changed in spite of extensive recognition of images and childhood lessons. And you will now detect the destructive feelings in the service of the no current: fear, guilt, anger, frustration, hostility. These feelings continue to smolder, but they may be artificially camouflaged, explained away by apparently real provocations, and successfully projected onto others. Discovering all these mechanisms is learning the language of the unconscious. So, any comments, questions? Let me pause here. Are people, kind of connecting with something inside of them that they're seeing a little more into? I know, in my work, it's kind of like I'm sort of my desire, like my frustration is around, not a positive, like manifesting. Well, it is about manifesting a positive thing, but it's kind of like there's this place where there's an old trauma trance and an old, aggressive reaction and sort of attempt to control that, I know is not useful. And so my yes current is trying to say, yes to accepting, and staying present to circumstances that usually trigger the rebellion inside of me. And so, like there's a way that I keep, trying to hold and work with this, but it is kind of like deeply buried. And so there's this kind of way that we just have to sit and keep kind of exploring and understanding at different levels, what is happening and how to, hold it in a way that we can be sort of not unconsciously just acting it out, right? So sometimes my no current comes out of my unconscious and is very present in the world, like I won't accept that. I am, this is not okay. No, 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 And so in those times, usually I am, sort of in a negative way, trying to demand that the world change in some form, that I want it to be. And to
Yeah,
I
I agree.
go ahead.
I'm
Yeah.
sorry. I was just gonna say an example from my life. I have a basement full of, unfinished sewing projects and paintings and every, medium of creativity, and then I just blame everybody else for,
Uh-huh.
getting in the way of me being able to have my unicorn time and create.
Yeah, excellent. Good example. So have you been able to kind of go inside and find, like, if it isn't, I mean, maybe there's also some reason that other people are in that way, but like what part of you may, like, let's say the door is wide open, you can go do it anytime, like there is this potential to just say yes and do it. Does some part of you register that sort of, oh, I don't know if I can or I want to, or, a little bit of hesitation or resistance?
Well, there definitely are a lot of the things that you've mentioned, but one thing I was thinking of specifically is like the completion of a project is a very uncomfortable position, and that's where I feel a lot of the no current.
Okay. So you got a
And
lot of
yeah,
projects almost all done, and then you hit the end of the sort of the completion phase, and that's
yeah.
when you get blocked. Okay. Get to be aware of that. So, like, what seems hard about completing? What gets in the way of completing?
Hmm, I think it's probably that a grief, that the grief that the project's over, that the fantasy's over, that whatever it's gonna be, whatever is, it's more of like a
Is there a part of you that's disappointed that it's not more or it's not something else or better or something? Is there?
well, it's not so much that as much as like just the love affair that I had with the idea will be over. Like I
Okay.
like to have a relationship with the idea, kind of
Uh-huh.
like you like to read a book or a series or binge a series on Netflix. And
Right.
then I think the Germans actually have a word for like the grief or sadness you feel when it's over. Like I think I start to feel anxious. So maybe it's related to some kind of like separation anxiety or something.
Yeah. I mean, it's a great, piece to explore, and yeah, who knows, like where, and it may have different ramifications and other kind of hidden places in your life and may come from some trauma, or like you said, it may just be the natural, process of grief that, whenever we're in the field of time, things are ending, changing, and so it is, like our natural being doesn't particularly like letting go or completing or ending in that way. And some
So just
people,
never finish it. Never go. It never
right,
ends.
good strategy. And then it's like, maybe not, maybe it is fine, or maybe like when you feel well, like, so that's my strategy, but what is the consequence of never finishing it? Does that have a downside? It prevents me from, having to face this loss, but then how do I feel when I don't complete, right? So there's kind of, again, this inner split. Some part of you, may feel, that in the natural order of things, all of these beautiful projects could be completed, but the, sort of resistance to the completion of the ending of the, maybe it's like what you're saying, it's like then it's dead, right? Instead of then it's gone to the west. So,
Yes.
maybe you could think of completing your projects as just having
Ah,
to the west or something like that, instead of like a death. Um, so, but it is, there's different ways that we keep exploring and excavating and finding other connections and deeper levels and stuff like that. So, good example.
But wouldn't it always come with a little bit, just to interject into this, like with a trust into yourself that there will be bigger projects in the future that might open even more of you? I don't know, as a way of thinking of it. And maybe there is a little bit of fear that will, yeah, or either lack of a little bit of trust. I don't know. I'm just like throwing
Right.
ideas about it.
And so that's where, somebody can go inside and confirm or not, like that might be a part of the picture, or it may be something that for you would make sense, right? But it doesn't quite, because that's what we're trying to know is really what is there, right? And it could be, something like that, but it also could be something else. And so we're not trying to theorize, figure it out. It's really about knowing it directly by this process of feeling it out
Yeah.
and hearing, the truth, and so, yeah, I
but
wasn't picking that up, Crystal, but is that something that makes sense to your, what you were saying? Is there some sense that, oh, well, if I could just remember that I have another even bigger thing yet to come, that I could finish this one and let it, and keep going or something? How, when you imagine that, when you feel into that,
yeah, it's
how?
interesting. I don't know if I feel it as a lack as much as maybe like back to like the unworthiness thing. Like maybe I'm not worthy of having bigger projects, or I'm not worthy of having a portfolio of finished projects, on another level. So
Mm,
as opposed to, oh, if I let this one go, will there be more? It's
right.
I know there'll be more, but maybe I shouldn't, put my head up. Like, I don't deserve that.
Right. Like in some ways, it sounds to me there that the finished product is like, here, look at me. I'm done. And it's like this kind of fear of presenting yourself at the end of it somehow, and being seen, to have your creation completed, to be seen.
Yeah, I kind of like I never really thought about this until we're talking about it right now, but it's a reflection, I think, of like my greater personality that I don't really connect to people or really show like my true nature, because then it's actually here to be judged, to be defined. I'd rather just like stay cooped up in my imagination.
Uh-huh.
And the same way, I guess, with these projects, I don't want to like let them be
Right. I don't want to
defined
get
or
defined by anything.
yeah, the
Yeah.
physicality.
Uh-huh.
So yeah, it's probably yeah, I can see how this is probably a deeper resistance to just wanting to be in the physical in general. Yeah.
Okay. Good example. Oh, thank you. Anybody else?
I guess what I've been kind of lately witnessing in myself is sort of a resistance to like inner resistance, subconscious one, to like expressing my feminine side. It's kind of, and I've delved deep into it, like where it comes from, and I know exactly, the scenarios from my childhood where I felt ashamed of being, being a girl, and in front of the person who I trust, like my older brother who I always looked up to. So I know when it started, and I feel like finally realizing that I'm still carrying that kind of deep fear and shame in me. Although I would never sound like I do, I would never say words like, like being a woman is, weak or anything like that. I would never think that I believe, but subconsciously deep, I guess there's still trauma in me, and I'm still kind of having this no current, right, that we described somewhere, that expressing my feminine side would not look like I'm weak, would not be perceived by, or would not be taken advantage of. So it's something that I'm trying to bring to awareness, and kind of like pour love into it, and just see my inner child, like when that, thought arose, like for the first time, and just kind of, I don't know, maybe just be there with it. And
Yeah, I mean, there's where like it seems like partly what you're saying is sort of the consciousness grew up and realized, that these things weren't true, that, but the child that was subjected to the shaming or the, rejection somehow for, the feminine side, like it still bears that, imprint, that feeling of hurting or rejection, and so that part, says, oh, I'm not going to let this out and be hurt again. I'm not going to show this part of me, and often, maybe we also judge it, like in, again, in the unconscious, your conscious mind may know well that it's not really to be judged, but somehow there is this fear inside, and where, we try to avoid and not let ourselves express certain aspects of our true being. And it may even be, our higher elements of our higher self, right? And certainly part of our divine feminine, our, is, like something to kind of want to reclaim and be part of the wholeness that we are. So in a sense, this is where the guide says that, there's like a step of kind of re-educating the inner child. So like the part of you that, like you can really understand, oh, I see where you have that fear, I know where it comes from, but maybe there's still a little bit of fear in you, like, and I don't know what, because we've never done it, and it's scary, to bring it out. But, like, I do know that it doesn't mean that you're weak. I do know that it doesn't make you less than, or, some kind of bad person. So like to the degree that the conscious mind, the adult awareness can, what the guide says calls the re-educating of the feelings and the fears and the beliefs of the inner child, kind of as an ally, as a, help. It's not about, suppressing or making it stop, but just helping remind it and bring to its consideration, right, that maybe there's a bigger world out there than the one that it grew up in, and that things are not as what they seem.
yeah.
So if you were to, like, are you in touch with her now a little?
um I don't know, it's almost, yes, I can definitely feel how she felt at that moment. um
Good.
There's more than just there's just the whole family, I guess. It's just the way that made me feel. And it's
Yeah, it's a big, it's a big, painful place, right? Like and so as you, feel that, can you sort of help, sort of connect with her, say like, oh, I see that, I'm here, like I'm sorry that happened to you, or, I get how it's painful and how problematic it feels, so you can just kind of join and be with her. Does it feel like you can connect with her?
Yeah, I feel like she had no other choice but become like more of a like take everything into its hands and into her hands and just kind of like be
Right. Good.
it was like almost no choice.
Right. Yeah, it was the best. She did the best she knew how, given what, so good. It's like, it's good to, can she feel your, alignment, like you're saying, basically, I see you. And, it's like there was no choice, there's nothing wrong here. You had to, kind of take care of yourself in that way. But now maybe things are different. Now maybe we can slowly, gradually open, expand, test out, what it's like to welcome this feminine aspect or to bring her out here and there every once in a while when it feels safe enough.
Yeah, I feel like it does happen on the rare occasions, but it's when I feel like when I could kind of let go of control and just embrace the beauty around and include that, my feminine side into this embrace and just
Mhm.
enjoy. Yeah.
And so good to remember, we've done it sometimes and it doesn't feel too bad, it's like when we can let go. And then just, you're kind of there helping her integrate and, change her trauma around that, right? There's old trauma. And so part of it is to, hold her so she can feel what happened and how it felt and, sort of release some of that pain that was there and then to kind of re-educate her, and remind her of, that there are wonderful things about the feminine and, and being sensitive and, being open and, that you don't oftentimes in our culture, we associate sort of the masculine as the tough and resilient or the, like powerful or whatever. And so the feminine does seem like it's, you know, vulnerable too much, right? And yet pathwork, basically the goal is to become undefended, to become vulnerable human beings. And in that vulnerability, to realize that there's a strength and a power and a resilience in that very vulnerability that is way beyond anything of our ego defenses.
But then there's a little bit of confusion. It's kind of like I don't know where it comes from, whether to just to get to challenge the challenge itself that I always loved, always been part of my life that it, you know, I love the challenges and that will put me into kind of like I don't know, I guess I don't know how incorporate the feminine energy is when I get onto these challenges. It's almost like I don't know. It's strange because when I encounter challenges and try to overcome them, always there's always something for me to overcome that way in the physical world. I I guess I just don't see the feminine energy being able to do yeah, I see that
Right.
this is where it comes again.
No, and that's I hear you, but the truth is like that it is the balance. Like the guide says that anything that is created that's, like it has to be a blending of the masculine and feminine energy. So he says, yeah, if you're going to like, even grow a plant, right? Like okay, you got to prepare the soil, you got to, put a seed in the ground, you got to water it, and so those are the doing the ask, the masculine aspects of the active, right? But then, we can't make the seed grow. We don't have, that's the receptive, that's the waiting, that's the trust and the faith in, something, unseen beyond, that brings new life or beauty out of our efforts, right? And if we're sort of too much in the, like controlling and the doing and the active, there's often times, like even if we create something wonderful, we can't receive it, or there's this, like way that we're you know, fully appreciating or, experiencing it, from our hearts and that kind of thing. So there's this whole place, I think that, our culture is that way. Like we're just driven to stay in the dynamic of the active. And part of what we're trying to do, and when they talk about, like it's the awakening of the divine feminine, on the planet in a bigger way, like we're trying to bring forth that receptive, that way of being and that balance. So the guide talks about where the masculine is in distortion, so will the feminine be in distortion. And where the feminine is in distortion, it creates a distortion in the masculine. So there's a real dynamic balance in the creation of our lives, to blend and have the capacity to access both of those. And I'm the same way, like I get into the doing mode, right? And I know I really kind of long for how do you blend it? How can I do and be at the same time? How can I unify those two currents, right? And I think maybe there's, sometimes where we're mostly in doing or mostly in being, but I do think that our highest expression can be in some kind of a balanced movement with that, internally integrated somehow. So, and much to explore there. So these are all, good things to be working with, and to feel sort of like this is many levels, right, of the masculine and feminine. So there's those, kind of fundamental principles and currents, and then there's the places in you where your feminine was wounded in a very personal way as a child. So many multiple levels, right, that we're working with all of this on. So let's see. Let me back up a minute here. It says, before you can discover the no current behind a strong unfulfilled wish, you may often be puzzled because the yes current is so desperately urgent. Instead of letting this mislead you into assuming that this proves the absence of a new no current, you may be certain that the urgency proves its presence. The frantic fear that the desperate urgency will not be fulfilled always heralds an underground no to the fulfillment. That's why we're unconsciously reacting with, franticness, because we can sense, we're not conscious of it, but we sense in the unconscious that, there's that no. Absence of such a no produces an easy, relaxed yes current without a tinge of desperation. It is a yes current that wants the fulfillment, is wholly ready for it, but is quite capable of leading a constructive life without it. So no attachment, right? Regardless of how well.
I got a question. Sorry. So,
okay.
So I always think like, okay, wow, the things that come really easy to me are the things that aren't that important to me, like money, career, like meh. And then the things that are important to me don't come that easy to me.
Right.
But is that because they're only important to me? Is the importance an illusion because there's drama there? And maybe they're not that important to me? The kind of like how when you're younger, you like mistake drama and love affairs for there being like a more intense connection.
Right. Good question.
So I'm like, maybe the things that I think I desperately want so bad is just because there's so much of an intense yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, yes, no.
Oftentimes I think that's, it's definitely a productive place to explore inside. Like the answer can't be just theoretical. You have to find it and know it, where it's there inside of you. Right. But it makes some sense. And like you said, like, okay, the things that come easy to you, you kind of discount or you devalue, right? And then, like somehow what's important is the things you don't have yet. So maybe that's, triggering some, real divine longing, to fulfill your mission and bring those into the plane, earth plane. But it also could represent, a mixed current where there's also some kind of sense of, well, I don't have it, and the one thing I don't have is the most important thing in the world. I have, like, or there's some kind of a drama, like you said, or forcing current within yourself that says, well, if I don't have it, this means I haven't mastered myself yet, or done everything. It's kind of in that current, and so you have to feel when you're connecting with it. What does it say, right? Is it? Do you feel that place where the things that you really long for that you don't have um, seem out of proportionately important to you? I think that's a good thing to just notice, right? Because here you have so much and you've accomplished a lot, and you can't even receive the goodness that's there, somehow for maybe the lacks that are still remaining, right?
Hey, I'm thinking about it a little bit more, and sorry if I'm hogging the stage here. This is just really fascinating, but uh, it's probably also on some level just an addiction to fighting.
Uh-huh.
And if I can't find it in the places that are, you just get into like smaller and smaller and less important details.
Right. And so, and the guide has, I think, like a good lecture on that, on unity and duality, where he talks about sort of that addiction to fighting, or, or it could also be in that masculine current, sort of, the addiction, like the will backed, kind of wanting something to make something happen, right? And to um, fix it or master it, or, manage to be on top of it, something like that. So there's a way that, the whole feminine is this kind of surrender and acceptance and allowing and patience and, that kind of piece. And uh, there's a really good discussion of sort of the feminine journey, which is so different. Like the masculine is the conquest and the hero's journey and the, get it done and slay the dragon and find the gold and the boon and bring it back, and all of that is good, but there's a whole other side of this journey. And so again, the imbalance within us, and maybe, the feminine is also where we have this no current, that feels like, oh man, it's the feminine is just patience and waiting and being stuck in. I think in this article it talks about, for the feminine, for her tasks to be completed, it sometimes takes a long time, and there's straw to spin into gold, and things to sort out, and it would take forever, and it requires, like animals and magic in order to even accomplish the task, right? And the feminine is kind of like stuck just holding the space and waiting, for, the movement to happen, right? And to complete these things. So it's a very different journey. Maybe at the end I can pull that up and share that with you. It's a good little article on sort of that. And you can kind of see, well, no wonder we prefer the masculine, so, but it requires both, and so there's this kind of calling forth of this, this womb of the feminine, this gestation place, this place of allowing nature to take its course of the, the natural timing of things. And letting go of the forcing current and the being with things as they are, right? And there's a deeper level of richness, I think, that we don't know in our culture that waits for us there. So, like again, if there's no current, right? If there's not a block to something, then the yes current, is kind of just in a flow. It trusts that it's going to unfold. It trusts that it'll unfold in divine timing. It's not attached to any kind of drama or particular way, right? And it's kind of like what you're saying, Crystal, like, you didn't even seem to have to work at it, and, things fall into place for your career, for your, financial and that sort of thing. So it is a yes current that wants the fulfillment. It is a yes current that wants the fulfillment. I don't understand the sentence. Is wholly ready for it, but is quite capable of leading a constructive life without it, regardless of how welcome the fulfillment would be. So again, there's no clinging or demand or forcing current, like, oh, I'll die without it, I have to have it, right? We can love to have it and welcome it, wholeheartedly, and we're also okay if it doesn't happen right now, or even maybe it comes in a way that, we least expect it or not how we want. So let us be more specific about the detection of a no current. You may be sure it exists if frustration remains in your life in spite of having found relevant images. So frustration is usually a good sign that something is amiss, and oftentimes it's, this kind of undetected no current, and you're just trying to make the yes current happen without unraveling the blocks inside of you to allow it to proceed. So you may also be sure about its existence if you are desperate in your yes current, if you fear that the fulfillment will never come, if you believe your life is dismal without it. After having thus determined that the no current must exist, it is now a question of experiencing it, not once, but whenever it is at work. To become more acutely aware of its existence, the practice of the daily review, as you have learned, is immensely helpful. So it's like just a practice of, reviewing your life every day and kind of noting, almost in two columns, like, any kind of triggering or, disharmony or unsatisfaction that comes up during the day. And you just kind of write the triggering event and how you felt, right? And it's kind of like a log. And then over time, you can begin to look for certain types of, issues like this no current, might show up in these triggering events, and you begin to kind of coalesce them and see them in all of their different expressions in your life. So if you progress in the right direction, you will now observe more rather than less, contrary to the mistaken idea that there is less to see because of your improvement. Close scrutiny of your emotions is a number one prerequisite. And it is amazing to me how much we continue to kind of unfold and understand and learn, as we keep observing and paying attention. So it's equally important to stir up the petrified part of the unconscious, and life usually does that for us to one degree or another. But, if it's not stirred up, if life doesn't trigger us in some ways, if left alone, untouched and unchallenged, the obstructions of the no current do not manifest. They slumber quietly, and only when shaken up do they react in a more noticeable fashion. Such stirring occurs through the frustrations and difficulties life brings. So again, instead of cursing, those times, or feeling like something's wrong because I'm frustrated and having difficulties, we can begin to realize, no, this is stirring up this unconscious material so that we can access it and look deeper. And it also occurs through constantly questioning the self and trying to get through the outer rational shell in a spirit of penetrating inner search. Stirred up emotions reveal the no current if they are investigated, questioned, and understood. As I have said, this stirring occurs partly through the unavoidable life circumstances and partly through deliberate processes in the pathwork. To observe productively what the unconscious expresses, it is important to separate the healthy part of yourself from the unhealthy, confused, involved part. Detached observation of something obscure and strange is the most healing procedure on the path of liberation. When your yes current observes the no current without frantic self-accusations, it becomes possible to translate the latter into concise human language. The concise formulation of previously vague feelings is invaluable and needs to be learned in the early stages of this path. And so this is also like, some level of this work, like feeling into these currents. And, we don't have a lot of language often for them, but even back in the 70s, there was this guy Gendler who, was working in therapy, and was aware that, it's like this kind of process of focusing in on our feelings, sensations, and just staying with them. Often out of that, the conscious emergence of, identification, of naming, of recognition happens. So, it's this, we don't like to usually hang out and just feel our sensations, and the mind wants to know what they are and how to fix it, or how to, so it takes this other, again, more feminine space of just resting and being with what is and feeling it, and allowing ourselves to tune in and wonder, what is this energy, what is this block, or this no, or this unhappiness, or this negative state, right? And as the more that we can just be present to it in ourselves, the more that the awareness starts to form. And then we can, oh, it's kind of like this, but then another word will come and fit even more exactly, right? So we can begin to name it in these ways as well. That's really helpful. So, on the other side of this, I started doing my own work here. I don't know if, people can see that, but I'm not sure that I'm going to get into it. So let's just follow the lecture. But I often, when I'm reading a lecture, like bring up my own experiences inside of myself and kind of apply them as I'm going through the lecture. So I found this lecture useful in my little exercise there. So he says, to observe the layers that are easily accessible when we focus our attention on them. And there are the half-conscious thoughts, the vague and diffuse attitudes and expressions that sort of are almost second nature. It just seems like they're us, it's how we are, we so easily overlook because they have become so familiar. None of the half-conscious feelings, reactions, and concepts are clearly formulated into concise thoughts. So if you watch the half-conscious reactions in the problem areas of your life, you will learn all you need to know about yourself. And this is a vital part of learning the language of your unconscious. So some of this is kind of like, mindfulness, right? As people are learning more and more that form of meditation and being present. And I think it's a good blend, and it's kind of like before the concept or the path of mindfulness was brought in its current form. I think the guide was basically pointing in that direction in many of the lectures. So the half-conscious material comprises your immediate emotional reactions as well as your fantasy life. Comparison of both often demonstrate your discrepancies and contradictions, as well as your immature expectations. The more clearly you see how you push away or withdraw from the very fulfillment you crave, as you see it again and again in action, the closer you come to eliminating the no current. You weaken it merely by observing it. When the petrified part of the unconscious is sufficiently badgered, partly from the petrification itself, which you experience as frustration and pain, so like the issue itself kind of badgers us, right? And partly because we're willing to kind of explore and go in and excavate with the pathwork. The hardness becomes sufficiently fluid to let go of some of its substance. And this causes the no current to appear strongly on the surface, less and less disguised, making it more and more difficult to rationalize or override, right? So like the end result of all of this work is to intensify the problem, right? To make the no current even stronger within us. But again, this can lead to a turning point, provided the ego does not lapse in its vigilance. And it's like we can be aware of it, we can see it. In essence, it is essential that you pay more attention to the no current in its exact form. A certain type of meditation can help. Become very quiet and relaxed, and begin by observing your thinking process and even your initial inability to do so, to observe the thinking process, that it just kind of goes on and captures us and takes us away. And this eventually leads to keeping our thoughts silent for a while, a short time, making ourselves utterly empty. In the emptiness, it is possible for hitherto checked and repressed material to surface. So this is also the way in most meditation practices this stuff gets provoked or comes up, because when we're sitting in the emptiness, often all of this stuff starts to bubble to the surface. If you express this purpose and desire it strongly enough without shying away, welcoming, I want the unconscious to bubble up in me, we can, it may be difficult at the beginning, but such effort after a while will establish a channel to a part of you that you could not previously tap. At first, you see the destructive elements floating up, and then you will be able to tap the constructive elements hidden deeply within. Often, however, the process does not follow the sequence. In other words, it is not that good follows after all the bad has come out. It fluctuates. This may represent an additional test for you because it may lead you to wishful thinking and an overestimation of yourself. So we're, like we arrive at a certain place, probably most of you have had that experience, and then we can't really hold it, and then we, but each time we do, we hold it for longer, it gets more deeply inside of us. And so to me, in a way, it's like sort of that getting it and losing it and getting it again that builds the muscle that allows us to ground and maintain, this other way of being that, we've not been trained in at all, or we've been conditioned in the opposite way in so many respects. So in occult literature, the expression the third eye is often used. Through establishing contact with the hidden unconscious and understanding the language of your unconscious obstructions, you develop third perceptive organs, forms of communication in every respect. Not only eyes with which to see more clearly, but ears and other senses of perception, as well as a new form of speech. And one thing that kind of comes up to me is like, usually where we're in a split or we're in a conflict, right? We have a yes current, we have a no current. And so we're developing the third eye, the third perspective, by awakening the higher self to recognize and see both sides and, deepen and, the understanding instead of just flipping and flopping back and forth between the two. We have this larger, wider perspective that can begin to, help unravel it.
I said, darling, though, when I was realizing, though, no, sorry, is that my no current, though, is taking my third eye and subtly using it to be the argument, saying things to me like, oh, well, why do you want to be in the physical? Why do you want to feel more into this reality when the purpose is to be more subtle, to have the third eye open, to explore other worlds? So why invest in this anyways? And so my no current is co-opting.
Right. Yeah. And it's saying, I don't want to be here, right? Is kind of like the no in general, maybe. And then, and I want to be in the subtle realms, right? My yes current is for the subtle realms, but
it's cunning. And you see how cunning it is?
Yeah, no, exactly.
It's very hard to cut that pie, where the part I want to keep and the part that's no, you're manipulating me away from integration, and so I'm having a hard time cutting that line.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's not unusual that it's this subtle and undermining, and so it's good that you're seeing that, right? And that again, sort of your to explore more of that part of you, you're incarnated, so something must have chosen to come, right? And there must be a purpose to being here in the body. And yes, also to expand and access, the spiritual realms, but maybe, you're trying to bring more of that, wisdom and light into the material, right? Is the purpose. So for you, I don't know, it's, I think in general, there are purposes, but, each one is unique. And so there's some kind of way that you need to see, what's the truth of why I chose to be here? And why is it that I resist or have such a no to fully embodying, and coming into life, you know, and there's, some deep reasons probably, or, some levels that, would be helpful to see and then support, because I think the idea is, in a way, like when we're born, just a small part of us is incarnated. And as we grow and develop over time, we're making space for more and more of us to be incarnated. And ideally, like the full soul, the full capacity of who we are is much bigger out in the, spiritual realms. And so that's part of the reason why we don't like to be squeezed into these little limited bodies and difficult places, right? But there's a way that we're doing this in service for some purpose and reason. And my sense is, as part of it, is that if we can spiritualize, by bringing our full love and light into the, cells and the DNA of our bodies, right? That something, a whole other potential, can happen. And it's kind of what the earth is working towards in some way. And so, yeah, many people are here, I think, from, many different distant places, and, like, it's a place of limitation and duality. And, the guide always says that when we incarnate here, we've been used to the spirit world where everything is much easier. And so there's a lot of, feeling of struggle and resistance that is just naturally our no current to being incarnated. Right. So
There are so many little creatures that want to climb on top of me. Oh my goodness.
So, in other words, let's see if did I skip something here? So medical physical practices have succeeded in providing adequate training and discipline, but they're not always used in the right direction. And people are tempted into the ideal state that they have not yet reached. So there's this kind of spiritual bypassing, right? We want to be there already and not do the work to get us there. So the newly acquired faculties are put into the service of escaping instead of being used for self-detection and understanding the meaning of destructive elements. So it requires a certain discipline. The difficulty is that behind the lack of willpower needed on your path is the no current, right there, like it's lazy or doesn't want to, do the work or, face something. And in other words, the brakes that you inadvertently put on your consciously desired fulfillment because of some unknown fear manifest in your pathwork in various ways: lack of energy and desire, laziness, being blocked, not understanding, projecting anger on those who help, dramatizing and exaggerating actual difficulties until the pathwork is no longer possible or can continue only in such a way that the real problems remain untouched. So we, again, kind of go around instead of into, through, and out the other side. Important also is the negative insistence on concentrating on the issues that the pathwork does not organically bring to your life. So, and I've seen this a lot, like, we avoid the real issue because we have a million I should lose weight, I should, be better at this, I should, focus on, like we're trying to perfect our image or, appear in a different way rather than sort of doing the things that life is, instead of facing what life is bringing to us, in these places of unfulfillment. When oftentimes we think, well, if I would just, be the perfect 10, then I would be more fulfilled or something like that. So to realize and be on the lookout for such delaying tactics from the no current is essential to your work of self-realization. Although a substantial part of you is eager to detect, to grow out of, to change the problems with the help of the yes current, there is also a deep fear of change, showing the no current at work. And so even just there, just, the changing of anything, right? And the old habit and the old, way that it works. So that's a part of what, I think, like the trauma trance, and defenses are about. Like, so, we have a no current that's a defense, and we're afraid of, letting go of that defense, and yet that's what's sort of required to get beyond and experience the change, but that fear of change, because that no has somehow protected us, kept us safe, So it's most advisable not to disregard the no current and act as though it did not exist. It must be heeded, for it contains the key to the problem itself. The important no current is also called resistance. But this word has lost its meaning for you, so the mere mention of it may only increase your no current. You have to work on your resistance, right? I think that was part of the early path, and everybody ended up getting resistant to working on their resistance. So if you realize that the no current is a universal factor present in your world in many forms, it might be easier for you to go about detecting it in yourself. Every one of you is constantly involved in a no current. It's not a question of whose no current is stronger and whose is weaker. The determining question is whether it is detected, observed, and followed in its machinations, which must be clearly understood. A stronger no current is constantly weakened by your awareness and is less harmful even than a puny but sluggish, obstinate one that clings to the personality in a most damaging fashion because it goes unobserved. The latter is more difficult to find, especially when the yes current is so strong. So please, my friends, set out to discover your no current. Find in what way it manifests, as well as on what misconceptions it is based. Your unconscious speaks steadily, my friends. It speaks without your hearing it. So you do not communicate with it. Yeah, it's like it's just kind of the background, and we think it's all us, and like we don't realize that there's like many parts, internal family systems, right? That we need to communicate with inside of us. And therefore we miss a very important part of our work. So often you go on searching for an intellectual understanding of one-time misconceptions, thereby overlooking the steady flow of the no current, its patterns, dynamics, how it works. Instead, focus on it, make it your task, and put the emphasis on self-observation. If every day you devote a little time to this all-important issue, the result will be most wonderful. So even, like you can just kind of, even in your meditation, like review your day for the times when you felt negative, right? That's a part of the no current, like the resistance, the no, I don't want to be here. This is too hard, or, I'm mad at something, or, so ask yourself, what goal do I want now? Where am I dissatisfied? What would I want to be different? How much do I want it? To what extent is there something in me that does not want or fears it? Or for one reason or another, says no to it? If the no current exists regarding the very thing I wish, it must also exist in my pathwork itself. How does it manifest there? How can I detect the various forms and manifestations of the no current in my daily life? And so it's like it might be there in the things that I wish. I think the other example that I just mentioned was like where it might be there, like, in some ways the world coming to us is, sort of the reflection of our own consciousness. And it's a kind of divine mathematical perfection, and so when it comes to us, oftentimes, like our no current is resisting what is, right? And it's kind of problematic when we go into a no current around what is, because what is and our no is not going to change it. In fact, our resistance and our no current actually will hold it in place and make it, more and, stuck and intense and problematic. So, there's the no to our longing, and then there's a no also to what we don't want, right? And that's also a whole other study there. But in terms of the no to the longing, these 5 questions are good, and you can begin to truthfully answer them. And your work on the path will be most dynamic, and your progress will astound and delight you. Again, the truthful answers to these questions through steady observation, formulation of vague feelings, and meditation exercises cannot be a permanent one. Do not believe that what you now find suffices and needs no further attention. Like we bring up these things and then we feel like, well, I already did that, but it's never done, right? There's always new things to be observed and understood. And especially if it's still recurring in our life space, right? It's like if we've completed it, it won't show up anymore. But if it's still showing up, then it just means that there's more to learn, more to discover, more to understand. So only then will the no current slowly weaken, and each observation may bring deeper and wider understanding. To be very quiet and relaxed during the periods of self-confrontation is, as you know, essential. But if you have difficulty in this respect, if you feel too tense, too harassed and impatient, if you believe that you are missing something else that is important without being able to name it, you can be sure that this is a typical manifestation of the no current. That is what prohibits you from becoming quiet and listening to yourself. So even something as simple as our longing to still ourselves and tune in, like we have resistance to, there's a no current there, right? And so to pay attention to that, and understand, like, and be present to it, right? And in a way, just being present to the presence of the no current then brings us into the present with it, and we're there in the meditation in some senses. So if you can acknowledge this, calmly stating to yourself, I'm too nervous and restless to relax, and do this part of the very process that I want, your restlessness will abate because you are in truth of the now. The next step will be easier. You can then observe in action how you react when you try to work on your problem. If you continue to observe how, perhaps at another time, the no current manifests in an entirely different way, but observe it calmly with all the keen one-pointed attention you can muster, your efforts must be crowned with success, and eventually you will eliminate what is most destructive in your life. Instead, you often storm ahead in your flights of fantasy to a faraway goal of perfection, while underneath you actually fear this very goal and thus overlook what stands in your way. The yes current must observe the no current. Let this be your motto. To the degree that you are successful in communicating with your own unconscious and understanding its language, you will establish a connection with a deeper, wiser part of your unconscious. It will eventually take over and guide you through all phases of your life, also those where you have not yet been successful. The helpful part of your unconscious must constantly furnish you with regenerative strength, creative energy, resourcefulness, harmony. But this help can come only when you have learned to become aware of, observe, and decipher the petrified and destructive part of the unconscious. When you learn to do this with calm detachment, you will not only learn to communicate consciously with the constructive part of your unconscious, but will also consciously communicate with the unconscious of other people. This means a great deal, my friends. You have begun to discover the truth of what I keep on saying, namely that all human beings constantly affect one another on their unconscious levels. The communications you are unaware of, determine the relationship. Being in a state of ignorance about this and not being able to grasp what is going on must leave you hanging in the air. You often fail to understand what really happens in relationships. You both fail to understand and to make yourself understood. Therefore, when you learn to consciously perceive the unconscious of others, thus understanding your interactions, you will experience a revolutionary liberation that is indeed a vital threshold in your development. So does that make sense? Like, as we learn the language of our unconscious, we begin to understand and see also how their unconscious is impacting our unconscious, and triggering our no, or we're triggering theirs. And so, like, and we feel the defenses and the no's come in. And so, like when we're able to observe our own, it also opens the space to be present and navigate sort of the interdynamics of interpersonal communication. And this is really so much needed in our world right now. So, again, this work of really knowing and understanding ourselves helps us know and understand the others. And then we still have the work of, dealing with our triggers and our emotional reactions. But the more that we can understand and see where they're coming from, like the easier we can hold the space for them and understand where they're coming from, what the other person is doing to provoke them, maybe even why that other person is feeling, like defended. So, some way that we're unconsciously bringing in, some energy that might impact them. So, we open to a much more in-depth, deep communication, commitment, and understanding with each other, which is part of what is going to be needed for us to go into the future. When this happens, you will see that there is no word to describe the phenomenon. It will be as though a dark curtain fell away from you. Misunderstandings, hurts, fears must cease to exist. You will see that what threatens you in others and makes you tense and defensive can be observed calmly in the way you have learned to do with your own self. You will learn to interpret it in others as you have done with yourself. You will learn to interpret what this gesture, that emphasis, this expression, that action, this utterance, that tense muscle mean, unbeknownst to the other person. You will hear, see, and perceive what other people really mean, what they want to express in spite of their disguise, what they are governed by behind their conscious attitudes and facades. You will know what their unconscious says when they behave in such and such a way. When you arrive at this point, you have nothing further to fear. But this is an organic development that cannot happen before you have done it with yourself. As long as you are frightened, you lack the necessary calm observation to perceive truthfully whether this concerns fright of what others might do to you or fright of your own unconscious. In the last lecture, I have discussed your fear of your own unconscious in connection with your fear of letting go into union with a mate, and the third in the triad, the fear of death. And so this fear of emergence, of union, of dissolution of the ego, right? It is this fear of one's own unconscious that makes the no current so strong. You will see the interconnection of the triad and the liberation I have just described when you no longer fear others, because you can quietly take them in and use all your observing functions and organs to see them in reality. Hence, this lecture can be truly understandable only if you verify the fear of your own unconscious. So does that make sense? Like we all are afraid of our own unconscious in a way. And as you lose this fear, you will learn to interpret the language of your unconscious. And thus you perfect yourself more and more in the technique that establishes a fearless relationship with others. So that ends the main body of the lecture. There's a few Q&As that we have here. How are we doing? It's we got 10 more minutes or so.
Darlene, I'm gonna drop out.
Okay.
Big lecture.
Yeah.
Big lecture.
So you took something for yourself from it?
Yeah, you know me, I'm always trying to distill everything
Exactly.
into one little nice little nugget that I
Right.
can, tuck away,
Right.
and actually use. In this lecture, I felt like everything seems to hinge on your wound. It's like if you can heal the wound, which is like at this point in my path work, I feel like it's almost impossible that you actually get to heal the wound. You may get to understand the wound a whole lot more. You may understand how it's triggered, and you may even unconsciously avoid triggers, just so that you don't get sucked into your wound again. The wound, to me, in this feels like the no. Okay? It's like, no, I don't want to feel the wound anymore. Therefore, anything that looks like it's going to trigger the wound or does trigger the wound, to me, is a no. You know?
I won't feel this.
I'd love to be able to live the rest of my life without having my wound triggered again, but I know that's not going to happen.
Right, as long as it's there, it's it's kind of like,
As long as
yeah.
it's there. I mean, do I ever get to heal the wound? I don't know.
So here's where I think that there is a piece that, it is possible, right? But there's something beyond all of the work that we do, right? Like we prepare the ground again, like it's part of that active and receptive piece, like we have to go in and do this work and bring it into consciousness and recognize it. But in some way, it feels like what heals the wound is the relationship with God who loves us, right? Like the divine principle in some way, and the direct realization, not the theory or the belief, but the knowing in us of that love, because the child was wounded for the lack of that love. And the only thing that ultimately heals it, right? We can know, like when the child is triggered, that it's maybe not the ultimate truth, but we need to find that ultimate truth of that love. And part of it is, through the channel of our love for ourselves. So if we cannot have our own self-compassion and if we can't see ourselves with the eyes of God, then it's hard for God to see through us to heal that place. And it's hard for us to feel the presence of God, because maybe we're hiding that place, or, we, are protecting it in some way. So
I
how that
understand.
happens is, this is part of the mystery, right? We have to again prepare the soil, but how we finally make that encounter with the divine in such a way that it can, melt the barriers around the heart and, restore the heart to its original wholeness. I mean, it's always whole. There's also that, that we have to realize and access inside of ourselves the part that is not wounded, that is the life principle. And so, the combination, I think, of those two, like the knowing of our own spirit that's whole, and the knowing of the compassion and the love that God has even for the parts of our wounded selves and our imperfections and our, struggles and difficulties, to have that sense that, that we are cared for in the way that we didn't get as children from our parents, but that's really the reality. And it was always the reality. God was always with us, and we were always loved.
It would seem to me then we actually need to love the wound.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's part of the difficulty, right? Because we end up resisting and fighting and trying to fix or get rid of, and the wound doesn't need that. It needs integration. It needs embrace. It needs holding and forgiveness and, all of those good things. So good question. Good.
Yeah.
Good discussion, buddy.
I'm gonna check out, guys.
Okay.
It's been a long day.
Yeah. Thanks, Frank.
Good night. Thank you.
No, Frank.
I was just trying to see if there was anything in these Q&As. I don't remember. So that first one is sort of about the. So it's 9:27. You feel like this is a good ending? So you might take a look. I'll look at those Q&As too and see if there's anything important in there. Sometimes there's some good stuff in there, but I think we covered this lecture well. I appreciate everybody being here. I hope you got something useful and helpful from it. And we'll do it again in 2 weeks. If people want to join again, that would be great. And
Big time.
Night.
Thank you. No,
Yeah.
this is great. Really, just a couple lightning bolts. Thank you.
Take care, everybody.
Okay.
Arlene,
Yeah.
hey, I wanted to ask you something.
Okay, I'll stay on if you want. Is it something you want to just
Yeah,
after group?
yeah, quick one.
Okay.
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 Good night, Skylar.
Night, everybody.
Hi, guys. The session. Are you still doing the sweat lodge next week?
Yeah. It's looking like it.
Yeah, I've been thinking maybe I should take a day off work. Because I do have Sunday off, but I work on Saturday that week.
Mm,
So it will be too much, I think, driving in back and forth. It would be nice to arrive maybe early or late, even in the evening the day before, and then just maybe stay overnight. And then, because when I drive back and forth during that same day, it's almost
I know.
over all the experiences I've had, right?
Right. Yeah, no, I think that would be good if you can do that, take off Monday and stay overnight here.
Yeah. Another thing that bothers me now, because I've taken on another responsibility. I've adopted a dog with a lymphoma with a cancer, and he only has couple months to go, and I've been trying to take a good care of him. And he's a very calm boy, but he's a large dog. He's a pit bull. He doesn't bark. He's not destructive or anything, but I don't know what to do with this now. Kind of like, if I take him with me, where is he gonna stay? And
Right.
uh, and yeah, he's very much calm. He's okay staying on his own, but I don't think I want to leave him for the whole day and the evening. He's gotten pretty attached to me, and I don't know.
Oh, I don't know either. I mean, like it says discernment all the way. Like, I mean, have you done a sweat lodge before? I can't remember. Have you come to one of my lodges? So,
I always wanted to.
yeah. So, and you could stay in the trailer, and we could leave him in the trailer while you were in the lodge, and he could maybe be down at the fire circle if he's calm enough, to be around people like while we're preparing. And then, after the lodge, you could, go back and be with him that evening, right? Staying in the trailer.
Yeah, if that would be great. If that's okay with you. He's not like, I even put him off leash. He's pretty calm. He doesn't bark at all. He only think he could whine a little bit, but he's when I'm at work and taking him with me in the kennel and he sees me around, but he seems to be very fine with the rest. I don't know. I just feel so bad leaving him for the whole, day and all.
Yeah. No, I think it would probably be okay for him to come and, at least be, with us for some of it. It's like they're going to be, like Crystal was there with her baby, and I think her husband's coming with the baby. So, there's going to be lots of people around and different things going on. So he just needs to be comfortable in that. And if not, we'll have to put him up in the trailer.
Oh yeah, he's totally okay with people. Yeah, and he's not like over crazy energy too. He's very laid back, very relaxed dog. Um but yeah, if how are the rest of the people? Is there enough room though for
Yeah, I think so. Right now I don't have, let's see, anybody that's using the trailer, and I've got also the space downstairs. So I think we can go ahead and, put you in that trailer. you come in, like Saturday evening,
Mhm.
and so. Okay. So, and then I don't know, there's like a registration on the lodge, or I can just know that you're coming and you can bring the money directly if you want.
Will the check be okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Sounds good. I will look into the cost too, and then maybe I could just add some more for if we staying in the trailer. I could just either separate check or
Yeah,
same check.
you can combine if you want in that case, and just, give me a little donation for the overnight if you want.
Sounds
And
good.
bring what you're going to need, as far as we'll have a meal after the lodge, right? But you might need something the night before and that morning for breakfast, and the next morning. So, yeah.
Yes. Sounds good. Thank you so much, Elaine.
Yeah.
Really looking forward to it.
Okay, it'd be great to see you.
Okay.
Take care.
Thank you. Good night.